The ground trembles, not from an earthquake, not from a distant storm, from footsteps. Each one sends shockwaves through the forest floor, rattling the ferns, disturbing the insects that scatter in every direction. Something massive is moving through the trees. The air grows thick with the smell of wet earth and rotting vegetation. Shadows shift, branches crack, and then, through the clearing, it appears. A creature so large it seems impossible. Its head rises above the canopy, neck stretching toward leaves that hang just out of reach. Its body is a fortress of muscle and bone, each leg thick as a tree trunk, designed to carry unimaginable weight. It pauses, turns its head slowly, and in that moment, the entire forest holds its breath. Because this is not a world built for humans. This is a world where size is survival, where every creature lives under the shadow of something larger, where the rules are written in blood and bone. And the question isn't whether you'll be hunted, it's when. This is Earth, but not the Earth you know. Not the world of cities and roads and boundaries drawn on maps. This is a planet where continents still drift, where mountains rise and fall across millions of years, where the land itself is constantly reshaping. The climate swings between extremes. Deserts bloom into jungles. Ice sheets advance and retreat. Oceans flood the lowlands and then recede, leaving behind new landscapes for life to conquer. There are no seasons the way we understand them, no predictable cycles, just constant, relentless change. And in this chaos, life adapts, or it dies. The forests here don't look like forests. They're tangles of ancient ferns and cycads, plants that grow thick and low to the ground, competing for every scrap of sunlight. The trees themselves are alien, towering conifers that spread across vast territories, their branches heavy with moisture, dripping constantly in the humid air. There are no flowers yet, no grass. The ground is covered in old moss and fungi, a living carpet that feeds on decay. Everything here is green and brown and wet, a world soaked in humidity, where breathing feels thick and every surface is slick with moisture. And moving through this world are the giants. They dominate every landscape, every ecosystem. They are the architects of their environment, shaping the forests by what they eat, where they walk, what they destroy. Some move in herds, dozens of them traveling together, their footsteps synchronized, their massive bodies creating paths through the vegetation that smaller creatures will use for generations. Others are solitary, territorial, patrolling their ranges with a slow, deliberate menace. They are herbivores, but that doesn't make them peaceful. A creature that weighs 30 tons doesn't need to hunt to be dangerous. It only needs to exist, to defend itself, to protect its young. And when it does, the force is devastating. But for all their size, these giants are not safe, because in this world, nothing is. Size creates its own vulnerabilities. A creature that large needs to eat constantly, spending every waking hour consuming vegetation, stripping trees bare, moving from feeding ground to feeding ground in an endless search for sustenance. They cannot hide. They cannot run fast. Their best defense is their mass, the sheer impossibility of bringing them down. But it's not an absolute defense, because there are predators here too, and they've learned patience. The carnivores of this world are nightmares made flesh, not as large as their prey, but built for violence. Their skulls are thick, their jaws lined with teeth designed to shear through muscle and crush bone. Their legs are powerful, capable of sudden bursts of speed that make up for their bulk. They don't chase prey across miles. They don't need to. They wait. They watch. They learn the patterns of the herds, identifying the weak, the young, the injured. And when the moment comes, they strike with a precision that seems impossible for something so massive. A hunt here is not quick. It's a siege. The predator moves in close, testing the defenses of the herd, looking for panic, for separation. If one creature breaks away, even for a moment, the attack begins. The first bite is strategic, aimed at tendons, at legs, at anything that will slow the prey down. The giant tries to turn, to swing its tail like a weapon, but the predator is already moving, circling, striking again. The struggle can last minutes or hours. Sometimes the prey escapes, bleeding but alive, limping back toward the safety of the herd. Sometimes it doesn't. And when a giant falls, the forest shifts. Scavengers emerge from the shadows. smaller predators wait their turn. The body becomes an ecosystem of its own, feeding dozens of species, enriching the soil, becoming part of the forest itself. But this is only one moment in one place. Across the planet, in different environments, the rules change. In the open plains, where the vegetation is sparse and the ground stretches flat toward the horizon, speed becomes the advantage. Smaller herbivores move in fast, coordinated groups, their bodies built for running, their senses tuned to detect threats from miles away. They graze quickly, nervously, always ready to bolt. The predators here are different too, leaner, faster, built for pursuit rather than ambush. The chases are brutal and exhausting, predator and prey pushing their bodies to the limit, neither willing to give up until one collapses. In the rivers and coastal shallows, another world exists entirely. Here, the giants are aquatic, their bodies adapted to life in the water, their limbs transformed into flippers, their necks extended to impossible lengths to reach fish and mollusks along the bottom. They glide through the water with a grace that seems at odds with their size, moving effortlessly in an environment where gravity is no longer an enemy. But even here, there is danger. Marine predators patrol. These waters, creatures with jaws that can snap shut with enough force to sever a limb, eyes that track movement in the murky depths, bodies streamlined for pursuit. And everywhere, in every environment, smaller creatures survive in the margins. Mammals exist here, but they are not dominant. They are cautious, nocturnal, spending their days hidden in burrows and their nights foraging for insects and seeds. They are warm-blooded, which gives them an advantage in cooler climates, but also makes them vulnerable, requiring constant food to maintain their body temperature. They are fast breeders, producing multiple offspring in short periods, compensating for high mortality with sheer numbers. They are survivors, but they are not rulers, not yet. Then something shifts. It starts slowly, almost imperceptibly. The climate begins to cool, not dramatically at first, just a subtle drop in average temperatures that most creatures don't notice. But over thousands of years, the change compounds. Rainfall patterns shift. Vegetation begins to thin in certain regions. The great forests that once covered the lowlands start to retreat, replaced by more open landscapes. The giants, who depend on constant access to food, begin to feel the pressure. Herds that once migrated between abundant feeding grounds now find those grounds diminished, the plants less nutritious, the competition more intense. And then the pressures accelerate. Volcanic activity increases along certain tectonic boundaries, filling the atmosphere with ash and sulfur dioxide, blocking sunlight, cooling the planet even further. Seasons become more extreme. Winters grow longer and harsher. Some species adapt, their bodies changing over generations, growing thicker coats, altering their behaviors, shifting their diets. But adaptation takes time, and for the largest creatures, the ones whose size made them dominant, time is running out. Their advantage becomes a liability. They need too much food. They reproduce too slowly. They cannot adjust quickly enough to a world that is transforming faster than evolution can keep up. The first extinctions are localized. Populations disappear from certain regions but persist in others. But as the climate continues to shift, those refugees grow smaller. The genetic diversity of species begins to collapse. Isolated populations become inbred, weakened, more vulnerable to disease and environmental stress. And then, in what seems like a geological instant, the dominance ends, not all at once, not in a single catastrophic event, but in a cascade of failures, ecosystem by ecosystem, as the foundations of their world crumble beneath them. The predators that depended on these giants as prey begin to disappear as well. With their food sources gone, they starve. Some try to adapt, to hunt smaller prey, but they are not built for it. Their massive jaws and thick skulls are designed for bringing down creatures that weigh tons, not for catching fast-moving animals. They become relics, the last of their kind wandering through landscapes that no longer support them until they too vanish. But the extinction is not total. Some lineages survive. Smaller relatives of the giants persist, their reduced size making them more adaptable, less dependent on vast amounts of food. They occupy new niches, evolve new behaviors, give rise to new species that will dominate future ecosystems. The mammals that lived in the margins begin to expand, their warm-blooded metabolism and faster reproduction, allowing them to take advantage of opportunities that open as the old order collapses. The world enters a transition period, an age where the rules are being rewritten, where survival depends not on size but on flexibility, on the ability to change quickly, to exploit new resources, to thrive in instability. And in this transition, patterns emerge. The prey that survive are not the largest or the strongest. They are the ones that can adjust their diets, that can tolerate a wider range of temperatures, that can breed quickly enough to recover from population crashes. The predators that endure are not the apex hunters of the previous age. They are the opportunists, the scavengers, the creatures willing to eat anything, to hunt anything, to occupy any available space. Evolution rewards versatility over specialization, and the planet, indifferent to which species rise or fall, continues its endless cycle of creation and destruction. But what the giants left behind is not nothing. Their bodies enriched the soil, their bones became fossils that would tell stories millions of years later. Their ecological impact shaped the environments that came after them. The forests they walked through evolved in response to their presence, developing defenses against browsing, creating new symbiotic relationships with other species. The predators that hunted them drove evolutionary arms races that produced faster, stronger, more resilient prey. Every species that lived in their shadow was shaped by their existence, and when they disappeared, the absence itself became a force, creating vacuums that new species rushed to fill. The climate continues to shift. The cooling trend that began the collapse eventually reverses. The planet warms again, ice sheets retreat, sea levels rise, continents continue their slow drift across the surface. New mountain ranges push upward, altering weather patterns, creating rain shadows, isolating populations. And life, relentless and adaptable, fills every available space. Deserts bloom, jungles spread, grasslands expand across the interior of continents, creating vast open spaces that favor creatures built for endurance rather than strength. And in these grasslands, a new kind of dominance emerges, not through size, but through coordination. Herding animals develop complex social structures, communication systems that allow them to warn each other of danger, coordinate migrations across thousands of miles, defend against predators through collective action. Their survival depends on the group, on maintaining cohesion, on recognizing and responding to threats faster than any individual could alone. And the predators that hunt them adapt as well, developing pack behaviors, cooperative hunting strategies, learning to outthink their prey rather than simply outrun them. But even this is temporary, because the only constant on this planet is change. Species rise, they dominate, they shape their world. And then the world changes again, and what was once an advantage becomes a burden. The cycle repeats endlessly, each iteration producing new forms, new strategies, new ecosystems that seem stable until they're not. The fossil record becomes a chronicle of these cycles, layers upon layers of life and death, dominance and extinction, each age leaving behind traces for the next. And through it all, through hundreds of millions of years of this relentless turnover, certain patterns persist. Predation drives innovation, competition favors efficiency. Environmental stress culls the inflexible. And in the margins, in the overlooked spaces between the giants and the apex predators, smaller creatures persist, adapt, and wait for their moment. Because in a world defined by change, survival belongs not to the strongest or the largest, but to those capable of becoming something else when the moment demands it. The mammals continue to diversify. From small, nocturnal insectivores, they branch into dozens of forms. Some return to the water, their bodies elongating, their limbs transforming into flippers, becoming predators in aquatic environments their ancestors abandoned millions of years earlier. Others take to the trees, developing grasping hands and forward-facing eyes, navigating three-dimensional environments with increasing sophistication. Still others grow larger, occupying niches left vacant by previous extinctions, becoming the new giants, the new herbivores that shape forests by what they eat, the new predators that rule their territories through size and strength. And in certain lineages, something unusual begins to develop, not just larger brains, but different brains. Structures that support more complex memory, more flexible problem solving, more sophisticated social cognition. These creatures begin to use tools, simple at first, but improving over generations. They develop cultures, behaviors that are learned rather than instinctive, passed from parent to offspring through observation and teaching. They become capable of altering their environments in increasingly dramatic ways, creating feedback loops where their behavior shapes the world, and the world shapes them in turn. But that moment is still far in the future. For now, the world remains wild, untamed, governed by the ancient logic of predator and prey, of adaptation and extinction, of endless competition for resources that are never quite enough. The land is beautiful and brutal in equal measure, a planet where life flourishes in impossible abundance and then crashes over and over, driven by forces beyond any creature's control. And perhaps that's the essential truth of this age. That dominance is always temporary, that every ruler eventually falls, that the Earth itself is the only constant, enduring through epochs, while the species that walk its surface rise and disappear like waves on an ocean. The giants who once shook the ground with their footsteps are gone, their bones buried under layers of sediment, their forms preserved only as shadows in stone. But they were real, they lived, they fought and fed and reproduced and died. They shaped their world as much as it shaped them, and for millions of years, they were the undisputed rulers of a planet that belonged to no one. This was the world before humans, a world of giants and monsters, of endless forests and open plains, of predators built for violence and prey built for survival, a world where every moment carried the weight of life and death, where the rules were written in instinct and enforced by teeth and claws. It was not a kind world, not a fair world, but it was a world alive in ways we can barely imagine, pulsing with energy and danger and beauty that existed for its own sake, witnessed by no one, remembered by nothing except the stones that hold its memory. And in the end, it reminds us that we are not the first to rule this planet. We are only the latest, the most recent in a long line of species that believe themselves permanent, that shape the world to fit their needs, that seem too powerful to ever fall. The giants thought the same once. They stood in forests that stretched to the horizon, surrounded by herds of their own kind, secure in their dominance. And then the world changed, and they disappeared. Not because they were weak, but because nothing lasts forever. The earth endures. It always has. It always will, long after every species currently alive has vanished, long after every mountain has eroded and every ocean has dried. This planet will still be here, spinning through space, creating new life, destroying old life, indifferent to which forms survive and which fade into extinction. That was true in the age of giants. It's true now. And it will be true long after we're gone. The only question is what we leave behind, what traces future species will find, what story the stones will tell about the age when humans ruled the earth, and whether they'll last any longer than the footprints of the giants, slowly filling with sediment, gradually disappearing until all that remains is the memory of something massive that once walked here, shook the ground, and then vanished into deep time. The silence after the giants is not empty. It's restless. The landscapes they once dominated don't simply wait for the next rulers to arrive. They transform. Rivers change course, carving new valleys through sediment that accumulated during millions of years of stable flow. Coastal regions flood and drain with the rhythm of glacial cycles, creating temporary bridges between continents, allowing species to migrate into territories they have never encountered before. And with each migration, with each new meeting between populations that evolved in isolation, the world becomes more complex, more interconnected, more volatile. In the forests that grow back after the giants disappear, the trees themselves are different. Without massive herbivores constantly pruning the canopy, certain species dominate that never could before. They grow taller, denser, blocking out more sunlight, creating darker understories where only shade-tolerant plants can survive. The insects that pollinate these plants evolve alongside them, developing longer proboscises to reach nectar hidden deep within flowers, creating dependencies so specific that the extinction of one species can cascade through dozens of others. The forest becomes a web of relationships so intricate that pulling out a single thread can unravel entire sections. And in these forests, new predators emerge. Not the massive bone crushers of the previous age, but something more refined, smaller, faster, with bodies built for agility rather than overwhelming force. They hunt in the trees as much as on the ground, their spines flexible enough to twist mid-leap, their claws retractable to maintain sharpness. They are ambush predators, patient and calculating, capable of remaining motionless for hours while waiting for prey to move within striking distance. Their success doesn't come from strength, but from precision. A single bite to the throat or spine, delivered at exactly the right moment, is all they need. Their prey adapts in response. Herding behavior becomes more sophisticated, with designated sentries that watch for danger while others feed, rotating positions so that no individual bears the burden of constant vigilance. Communication systems develop, vocalizations that convey not just alarm, but specific information about the type and location of threats. Some species develop warning coloration, bright patterns that signal toxicity or danger, deterring predators without the need for physical confrontation. Others go the opposite direction, evolving camouflage so effective they seem to vanish against the forest floor, their survival dependent on remaining unseen rather than outrunning pursuit. But the most significant changes are happening at smaller scales, in creatures most observers would overlook entirely. The insects are diversifying at an explosive rate, filling ecological roles that didn't exist before. Pollinators become more specialized, forming exclusive partnerships with specific plants. Decomposers become more efficient, breaking down dead matter faster, recycling nutrients back into the soil more quickly, and predatory insects grow larger and more formidable, some achieving wingspans that would seem impossible, hunting not just other insects but small vertebrates, becoming aerial threats that patrol the forest canopy like living shadows. The climate continues its endless oscillation. Warm periods alternate with ice ages, each lasting tens of thousands of years, each reshaping the distribution of life across the planet. During the cold periods, ice sheets advance from the poles, grinding down mountains, scouring the land, pushing species toward the equator, where refugia persist in tropical regions that remain warm and wet. During these times, diversity contracts, populations become isolated, genetic bottlenecks occur. But when the ice retreats, when the planet warms again, those populations explode outward, recolonizing vacant territories, encountering other populations that survived in different refugia, hybridizing, speciating, creating bursts of evolutionary innovation. And through these cycles, certain lineages persist while others vanish. The crocodilians, already ancient by the time the giants disappeared, continue virtually unchanged. Their body plans so perfectly adapted to their niche that evolution finds little to improve. They lie motionless in rivers and swamps, their eyes and nostrils barely breaking the surface, waiting for prey to come to the water's edge. When they strike, it's with explosive force, jaws snapping shut with enough pressure to crush bone, bodies thrashing to disorient and drown their victims. They are living fossils, links to a past that refuses to completely disappear, proof that sometimes the old ways remain the best ways. The birds have risen to prominence in ways their ancestors could never have imagined. From small feathered dinosaurs that survived whatever killed the giants, they've diversified into thousands of species, occupying every available niche. Some have grown flightless, their bodies becoming massive and muscular, dominating grasslands as apex predators, their powerful legs capable of delivering kicks that can shatter ribs. Others have become specialized fishers, diving into oceans from heights that would kill most creatures, hitting the water at speeds that require specially adapted skulls to absorb the impact. Still others have evolved to be scavengers, soaring on thermal currents for hours without flapping, their keen eyesight capable of spotting carrion from miles away, their digestive systems able to process rotting meat that would poison other animals. But perhaps the most remarkable are the raptors, the hunters that rule the skies with a combination of speed, vision, and killing efficiency that makes them nearly perfect predators. They patrol territories from above, their eyesight so acute they can spot a mouse moving through grass from 1,000 feet up. When they dive, they reach speeds that turn their bodies into missiles, talons extended, striking prey with enough force to kill instantly. They are patient, intelligent, capable of learning and adapting their hunting strategies based on experience. And unlike the giants who ruled through size, these predators rule through mastery of three-dimensional space, exploiting an advantage no ground-bound creature can match. In the oceans, an entirely separate drama unfolds. Here, the rules are different. Size still matters, but so does intelligence, echolocation, the ability to navigate in darkness where vision is useless. The marine mammals have become the dominant predators, their bodies streamlined for speed, their brains enlarged to process complex social information. They hunt in coordinated pods using sophisticated communication to surround schools of fish, driving them toward the surface where escape becomes impossible. Some have evolved teeth designed to grip rather than tear, allowing them to swallow prey whole. Others have lost their teeth entirely, developing baleen plates that filter vast quantities of water, extracting tiny organisms by the millions, sustaining enormous bodies on creatures too small to see individually. And in the deepest parts of the ocean, where sunlight never penetrates, life exists in forms that seem alien, even by the standards of this ancient world. Creatures with bioluminescent lures dangling from their heads, attracting prey in the darkness. Translucent bodies that make them nearly invisible in the dim light generated by other organisms. Jaws that can unhinge to swallow prey larger than themselves. Stomachs that can expand to accommodate meals that might not come for months. These are survivors of a different kind, adapted to scarcity, to pressure, to conditions that would kill surface-dwelling creatures in minutes. They are reminders that life can persist anywhere, under any conditions, as long as there's energy to extract and ways to. Avoid being extracted in turn. Back on land, in the grasslands that have spread across the interior of continents, a different kind of ecosystem has developed. Here, the vegetation is tough and low, grasses that can survive periodic fires, that grow from the base rather than the tip, making them nearly impossible to kill by grazing. The herbivores that feed here have evolved specialized digestive systems, multiple stomachs filled with bacteria that break down cellulose, extracting nutrition from plants that would be indigestible to most creatures. They move in vast herds, sometimes numbering in the millions, their migrations dictated by rainfall patterns, following the green growth that springs up after storms. These migrations are spectacles of endurance, thousands of miles covered over months, pregnant females giving birth while moving, the young forced to stand and walk within minutes or be left behind. Predators follow the herds, picking off the weak and the slow, but never able, to make a significant dent in the population. The sheer numbers provide protection. Individual mortality is high, but the herd persists, an organism unto itself, flowing across the landscape like a living river. But even here, even in these seemingly stable ecosystems, change is constant. Droughts can last years, drying up water sources, forcing herds into smaller and smaller areas where competition becomes deadly. Diseases spread through dense populations, killing thousands before resistance evolves. Fires sweep across the plains during dry seasons, consuming everything, resetting the landscape to bare earth. And from that earth, new growth emerges, different species than before, beginning the cycle again. The carnivores that hunt these herds have become specialists in reading behavior, in identifying the individuals most likely to be caught. They watch for limps, for animals that fall behind, for mothers distracted by newborn calves. They test the defenses of the herd, probing for weaknesses, learning which individuals panic and which stand their ground. And they teach these skills to their offspring, passing knowledge from generation to generation, creating hunting traditions that persist long after the individuals who developed them have died. And in all of this, in every environment, in every interaction between predator and prey, parasite and host, competitor and symbiont, evolution continues its work. Mutations occur constantly, most harmful or neutral, but occasionally one provides an advantage. An individual born with slightly sharper vision, slightly faster reflexes, slightly better camouflage. These individuals survive at higher rates, reproduce more successfully, pass their advantages to their offspring. Over generations, the advantage spreads. The population shifts, the species changes, and the world, already complex beyond comprehension, becomes more complex still. But complexity creates fragility. The more interconnected a system becomes, the more vulnerable it is to disruption. A disease that wipes out a single species of pollinator can cause crashes in dozens of plant species. The loss of those plants affects herbivores, which affects predators, which affects scavengers, which affects decomposers, which affects soil quality, which affects plant growth, creating feedback loops that amplify small disruptions into catastrophic collapses. The ecosystems that seem most stable, most diverse, most successful, are often the ones closest to tipping points they don't know exist, and the planet continues to test them. Asteroid impacts, though rare, still occur, some large enough to throw dust into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight for years, collapsing food chains from the bottom up. Volcanic super-eruptions fill the air with sulfur and ash, cooling the climate, acidifying rain, poisoning water sources. Tectonic shifts create new mountain ranges that alter wind patterns, creating deserts where forests once stood, flooding lowlands, isolating populations. Each of these events is an extinction filter, removing species unable to adapt, opening opportunities for those that can. And through all of this, through hundreds of millions of years of turnover and transformation, the story remains the same. Life persists. Not any particular form of life, not any specific species or lineage, but life itself. The fundamental pattern of reproduction, variation, and selection that drives evolution forward regardless of which individuals win or lose. The planet becomes a testing ground, an arena where endless experiments play out simultaneously, where success is measured only by continuation, and failure is measured by absence. The world before humans was not a single age, but countless ages, each with its own rulers, its own ecosystems, its own logic. The giants were only one chapter in a much longer story, one iteration in an endless series of attempts to answer the same question. How do you survive on a planet that's constantly trying to kill you? Different species found different answers: size, speed, intelligence, cooperation, camouflage, toxicity, flight, burrowing, migration, hibernation. Each strategy worked for a time, in certain places, under specific conditions. And then, the conditions changed, and the strategies that once meant survival became liabilities. But the knowledge accumulated, not in any conscious sense, not in books or records, but encoded in genes, in behaviors, in the physical structures of bodies shaped by millions of years of trial and error. Every species alive in any given moment carried within it the solutions discovered by its ancestors. Refinements built on refinements, adaptations layered on adaptations. And when those species went extinct, some of that knowledge was lost, but some was passed on, incorporated into descendant species, recombined with other solutions, creating new possibilities that never existed before. And in this process, in this endless churning of creation and destruction, patterns emerged that transcended individual species. Ecosystems developed rhythms, seasonal migrations that synchronized predator and prey, flowering times that matched the emergence of pollinators, breeding cycles timed to resource availability. These patterns were not planned or designed. They were emergent properties of millions of individual organisms, each pursuing their own survival, each responding to the same environmental cues, each constrained by the same physical laws. The result was coordination without coordinators, order without authority, systems that functioned with a complexity that made them seem intelligent, even though no individual component possessed anything approaching intelligence. And yet, for all this complexity, for all the sophistication these ecosystems achieved, they remained fundamentally vulnerable, because the planet itself was indifferent to their existence. When conditions shifted, when the climate swung toward extremes that exceeded the tolerance ranges of dominant species, the systems collapsed. Not gradually, not with warning signs that allowed for adjustment, but rapidly, catastrophically, leaving behind fossils and empty niches and silence where there had once been abundance. The smaller mammals that survived in the margins during the Age of Giants continued their expansion, their diversification accelerating as opportunities multiplied. Some remained small, maintaining the advantages of size that allowed them to hide, to survive on limited resources, to reproduce quickly when conditions favored them. But others experimented with larger forms, their bodies growing over generations, testing the limits of what mammalian physiology could achieve. They developed specialized teeth for different diets, grinding molars for processing vegetation, sharp canines for tearing meat, incisors that grew continuously to compensate for constant wear. Their warm blood, once a liability that demanded constant fuel, became an advantage as the climate grew more variable. They could remain active in cooler temperatures, could hunt at night when cold-blooded predators became sluggish, could colonize higher elevations and higher latitudes where reptilian competitors couldn't survive. And their reproductive strategy, investing heavily in fewer offspring, providing extended parental care, teaching rather than relying purely on instinct, allowed them to accumulate behavioral innovations that spread through populations faster than genetic changes alone could achieve. In the forests, primates emerged from insectivorous ancestors, their hands evolving to grasp branches, their eyes rotating forward to provide depth perception in three-dimensional environments. They developed social structures of increasing complexity, hierarchies based not just on physical strength, but on alliances, on memory of past interactions, on the ability to predict behavior and manipulate social situations to their advantage. Their brains grew larger relative to body size, requiring more energy to maintain, but providing cognitive abilities that justified the cost. Some lineages remained in the trees, becoming specialists in arboreal life. Their bodies adapted to brachiating through canopies. Their diets focused on fruits and leaves. But others began spending more time on the ground, their bodies adjusting to bipedalism, their hands freed from the requirements of locomotion, becoming tools for manipulation rather than just gripping branches. These ground-dwelling primates faced different pressures than their arboreal cousins. They were more vulnerable to predators, more exposed to temperature extremes, more dependent on cooperation for survival. And in response to these pressures, their social systems became more elaborate, their communication more nuanced, their capacity for abstract thought more developed. But they remained minor players in their ecosystems, just another species among thousands, subject to the same forces of predation and competition and environmental stress as everything else. Their intelligence gave them advantages in certain situations, but it wasn't a guarantee of dominance. Plenty of intelligent species had gone extinct. Plenty of species with elaborate social systems had disappeared when their environments changed faster than they could adapt. There was nothing inevitable about their success, nothing predetermined about their future. The world continued turning. Ice ages came and went with increasing frequency, each one reshaping the distribution of forests and grasslands, each one driving migrations and extinctions and speciations. The continents continued their slow collision and separation, creating and destroying land bridges, isolating and reconnecting populations, generating the geographic diversity that drove diversification. Volcanic activity waxed and waned, some periods seeing massive eruptions that affected global climate, others remaining relatively quiet for millions of years. And through all of this, the fundamental logic of evolution remained unchanged. Reproduce, vary, survive. The species that persisted were not the strongest or the smartest or the most deserving. They were simply the ones whose traits happened to match the demands of their environment during the specific period they lived in. Change the environment, change the demands, and different traits become valuable. What worked yesterday might fail tomorrow. What seems like an advantage might become a death sentence when conditions shift. The fossil record from this period shows wave after wave of diversification and collapse. New body plans emerging, spreading, dominating for millions of years, then vanishing. As conditions changed, entire orders of mammals rising to prominence and then declining into extinction. Their niches filled by unrelated lineages that evolved similar solutions to similar problems. The pattern repeats so consistently, it seems almost rhythmic, as if the planet itself has a pulse, a cycle of creation and destruction that operates on timescales too vast for any individual organism to perceive. But within these cycles, certain trends become apparent. Brain size increasing in multiple lineages, not just primates, but also in carnivores, in marine mammals, in birds. Social complexity increasing, groups becoming larger, interactions becoming more sophisticated, communication systems becoming more elaborate, tool use appearing independently in different species, some using rocks to crack open shells, others using sticks to extract insects from crevices, still others modifying their environments in ways that benefit their survival. These innovations don't guarantee success, but they represent experiments in new strategies, new ways of solving the ancient problems of survival and reproduction. And the predators continue to refine their craft. The big cats that evolved on the grasslands develop hunting strategies of remarkable sophistication, using terrain to conceal their approach. coordinating attacks with other members of their pride, learning the behaviors of their prey so thoroughly they can predict movements before they happen. The wolves that hunt in the forests, perfect pack coordination, different individuals taking specific roles during hunts, some driving prey while others cut off escape routes. Success depending on precise timing and flawless execution. The prey, in turn, develop counter-strategies. Some species evolve weapons, horns, and antlers that can gore attackers, hooves that can shatter ribs with a well-placed kick. Others develop armor, thick hides that resist teeth and claws, making them too difficult to kill to be worth the effort. Still others rely on speed and endurance, bodies built to run for hours, outlasting predators whose sprint speed is impressive but unsustainable. The arms race continues, each adaptation by one side driving counter-adaptations by the other, an endless cycle of innovation that produces increasing specialization, increasing efficiency, increasing refinement. But specialization carries risks. A species perfectly adapted to specific conditions becomes vulnerable when those conditions change. The predator that evolves to hunt a single type of prey faces starvation if that prey disappears. The herbivore that develops a digestive system optimized for one type of plant struggles when that plant becomes scarce. Specialists can dominate stable environments, but generalists survive disruption. And in a world where stability is temporary and disruption is guaranteed, the long-term advantage goes to those capable of flexibility. The planet enters another phase of climate instability, oscillations, becoming more extreme, ice ages becoming deeper and lasting longer. The tropical forests that once circled the globe retreat toward the equator, replaced by grasslands and eventually by tundra as temperatures plummet. The sea levels drop as water becomes locked in ice, exposing continental shelves, creating new land bridges, allowing species to migrate into regions they've never encountered. And with each migration, with each meeting between populations that evolved in isolation, new competitive pressures emerge. New predator-prey relationships form. New diseases spread through populations that lack immunity. Some species thrive in these conditions. The ones with thick fur, the ones capable of hibernating through winters that last months, the ones that can alter their diets seasonally to take advantage of whatever resources remain available. But many more struggle, populations contract, genetic diversity declines, local extinctions increase. The fossil record from this period shows declining diversity in many lineages, species disappearing from large portions of their former ranges, persisting only in small refugia where conditions remain marginally suitable. And yet, life finds ways to persist even in the harshest conditions. On the tundra, herbivores evolve massive bodies covered in thick wool, their digestive systems capable of extracting nutrition from frozen vegetation. Their behaviors adapted to surviving temperatures that would kill their tropical relatives. The predators that hunt them grow equally impressive, developing white fur for camouflage against snow, wide paws that distribute weight across soft snow, patience to stalk prey for days until the moment for attack arrives. In the oceans, mostly insulated from the worst effects of ice ages, life continues with less disruption. The marine mammals continue diversifying, some growing to sizes that rival the largest creatures that ever lived, their bodies supported by water, freed from the gravitational constraints that limit terrestrial animals. They feed on vast swarms of small organisms, filtering tons of water to extract the nutrition they need. Their size both a defense against predators and a requirement of their feeding strategy. They migrate thousands of miles between feeding and breeding grounds, following seasonal patterns of productivity, their navigation guided by landmarks, by currents, by magnetic fields, by mechanisms still not fully understood. The deeper oceans remain largely unchanged, their stability protecting them from the climate chaos affecting the surface world. Here, in the abyssal plains and the deep trenches, communities of organisms persist that have remained essentially identical for hundreds of millions of years. The conditions are too extreme, too consistent to favor rapid evolution. What works here has always worked here, and what doesn't work dies quickly, leaving no descendants to try alternative strategies. But even in the deep oceans, change eventually arrives. Shifts in ocean circulation patterns, driven by changes in temperature and salinity at the surface, alter the flow of nutrients into the depths. Communities that depended on specific currents delivering specific resources find those resources diminishing, forcing adaptations, driving extinctions, creating opportunities for species that were previously marginal. And on land, as the ice ages peak and then begin to retreat, the world that emerges is different from the one that existed before. Species that survived in refugia begin expanding again, but the routes of expansion have changed, the available territories have been reshaped, the competitive landscape has been altered by extinctions and by new arrivals from other regions. The ecosystems that form during this recovery period are patchworks, combinations of species that never interacted before, forced together by circumstance, creating novel relationships, novel conflicts, novel balances that had no precedent. The grasslands expand again as the ice retreats, but they're different grasslands than before, dominated by new species of grasses, supporting new communities of herbivores, hunted by new lineages of predators. The forests that grow back are different forests, the trees that survived the ice ages spreading from their refugia, but not all species making it back to their former ranges, creating gaps that other species rush to fill, generating forest communities that have no analog in the previous age. And in this reshaped world, the primates that survived in tropical refugia begin their own expansion. Small populations that had been isolated for thousands of generations, that had developed distinct behaviors and physical characteristics in response to local conditions, now encounter each other again, sometimes interbreeding, sometimes competing, sometimes coexisting in an uneasy proximity. They spread into new habitats, testing their adaptability, their capacity to survive in environments their ancestors never experienced. Some lineages succeed, expanding their ranges, increasing their numbers. Others fail, declining to extinction, leaving behind only traces in the fossil record. But among those that succeed, certain populations develop innovations that seem minor at the time, but will prove significant later. The use of fire, initially just exploiting natural fires, then learning to maintain them, eventually learning to create them on demand. The modification of stones into more effective tools, not just using rocks as hammers, but deliberately shaping them, creating edges and points optimized for specific tasks. The development of more sophisticated vocal communication, sounds that represent specific concepts, that can be combined in novel ways to convey complex information. These innovations don't make them dominant. They're still vulnerable to predators, still subject to disease and starvation and environmental catastrophe. They still live in small groups, still struggle to survive harsh seasons, still lose members to accidents and violence and the thousand other ways the world finds to kill living things. But they're accumulating capabilities that will matter later, building a foundation that future generations will expand upon, creating possibilities that don't yet exist, but will. The world is still wild, still uncontrolled, still governed by forces far beyond the influence of any organism. The climate continues its cycles, warming and cooling according to patterns driven by orbital mechanics, by solar output, by atmospheric composition, by factors operating at scales that make individual lives invisible. The continents continue drifting, the mountains continue rising and eroding, the oceans continue advancing and retreating, and life continues adapting, continues diversifying, continues the endless experiment of finding new ways to extract energy from the environment and convert it into more life. This is the legacy of the Age of Giants, and all the ages that followed. Not stability, but constant change. Not dominance, but temporary success. Not permanence, but brief flourishing before inevitable decline. Every species that ruled the Earth eventually lost that rule. Not because they failed, but because the world moved on. Because conditions shifted in ways they couldn't match, because something else rose to take their place. The Earth has seen countless rulers, creatures so massive they shook the ground, predators so fierce they seemed invincible, herbivores so numerous they darkened the plains, species so successful they appeared eternal, and all of them passed. All of them left behind bones and fossils and empty spaces that other species filled. The planet continued turning, indifferent to which forms dominated at any given moment, providing opportunities for life without guaranteeing success to any particular lineage. And perhaps that's the truth that echoes across all these ages, across all these rises and falls, that the world doesn't belong to anyone, that dominance is temporary, that the ground beneath your feet is always shifting, even when you can't feel it moving. The giants stood in forests that seemed permanent, surrounded by abundance that seemed endless, secure in size that seemed sufficient. They were wrong, not because they were weak or flawed, but because permanence is an illusion, because the only constant is change, and because every age, no matter how long it lasts, is just a moment in a story that has no ending. The world before humans was not a paradise. It was not a pristine wilderness waiting to be discovered. It was a battleground where every creature fought for survival, where violence and beauty coexisted in every moment, where life flourished in impossible abundance while simultaneously destroying itself in endless competition. It was a world that produced wonders and horrors in equal measure, that created and destroyed with equal indifference, that gave no guarantees and showed no mercy. And we are products of that world, built by it, shaped by it, carrying within us the solutions our ancestors discovered, the adaptations they accumulated, the capabilities they refined over millions of years of trial and error. We didn't emerge from nowhere. We're not separate from the story of life on Earth. We're the latest chapter in a narrative that began billions of years ago and will continue long after we're gone. The giants are gone. The great predators that hunted them are gone. The forests they walked through are gone. But the planet remains, still turning, still changing, still creating new life and destroying old life with the same indifference it always has. And someday, inevitably, we'll be gone too. Another species that rose to dominance, that shaped the world to fit our needs, that believed ourselves permanent until the world proved us wrong. And when that happens, when future creatures dig through layers of stone and find traces of our existence, they'll see what we see when we find the fossils of giants. Evidence of something that once dominated, that once seemed unstoppable, that once believed the world belonged to them. They'll see bones and tools and the ruins of civilizations. And they'll wonder, as we wonder now, how something so powerful could disappear. And the answer will be the same answer it's always been. Because nothing lasts forever. Because dominance is temporary. Because the earth belongs to no one. It never did. It never will. We're just passing through like the giants before us, like everything that came before them, like everything that will come after us. And the only legacy that matters is what the world makes of our existence after we're gone. Whether it remembers us as a species that understood our place in the story, or as another group of giants who believed themselves eternal and learned too late that nothing is. The ground is still trembling, not from the footsteps of giants. They're silent now. Buried under millions of years of sediment, their bones turned to stone, their story told only by the rocks that remember. But the planet continues, and somewhere, something new is rising. Something that will dominate for a time. Something that will believe itself permanent. Something that will eventually fall, just like everything else that ever ruled the earth. That's the pattern. That's the truth. That's the world before humans, during humans, and after humans. An endless cycle of rise and fall, creation and destruction, dominance and extinction. The world doesn't change, only the names of the rulers do, and in the end, even the names disappear, leaving behind nothing but silence and stone and the patient earth, waiting for the next species to believe it can last forever.